Okay, hello everybody, welcome here. Does everyone has a place to sit at first? Okay, that's great. It's my pleasure to welcome you here at the press conference before the start of the second Parliament Summit of the International Crimean Platform here in Prague, which will happen tomorrow. My name is Marek Haderbalec. I'm the Media Communication Coordinator at Nesehnutí. Nesehnutí is an organization that has been working and supporting the development of civil society in Ukraine since 2014. We do that by supporting local organizations and communities and independent media. And today we are here because of the collaboration with other organizations involved in the second Parliamentary Summit of the International Crimean Platform, which will happen tomorrow at the Congress Center here in Prague. Here with me are 5 speakers, 5 experts on various topics related to Crimea and its occupation by Russia, who took their time to present what they are currently working on, their aims and their goals. Okay, it's my pleasure to welcome Olga Skripnik, here, chair of the board of the Crimean Human Rights Group, a human rights defender from Crimea, coordinator of the Crimea Platform Expert Network. Also, Tatiana Pechonchik, head of the board of Zmina Human Rights Center, a member of Crimean Platform Expert Network, and Ukrainian human rights activist. Also, Darina Pidhorna, a legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights, Dr. Gayana Yüksel, a distinguished associate professor at the Department of Journalism within the Institute of Philology and Journalism at Volodymyr Vernadsky Tauridel National University in Kyiv. And last but not least, Aya Mora, Advocacy and Communication Manager at the Ukraine Legal Advisory Group. Additional information about the speakers are here on the papers. If you want them and you still haven't taken them, you can take them here. I'm sorry. How will the press conference proceed? In like 2 or 3 minutes to 11:15, we will start short contributions by the speakers that will take from 5 to 10 minutes. After that, there will be space for discussion and for some questions from you. And at 11, we will start with individual interviews. There will be space for about an hour and a half. We will be there for you. I will also kindly ask you to fill in the sheet for the presents if you haven't did it yet. And now it's time to ask if there are any questions from you before we begin. If there's anything more you need to know. And if there isn't, I will forward the word to the first speaker, who will be Olga Skripnik. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, for your attention to Crimea topic for our organizations. So I represent the Crimean Human Rights Group. We have been working and documenting human rights violations in Crimea since 2014, like my colleagues here. Also, all our organizations are members of International Crimea Platform. This platform was established in 2021. It was initiative of President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and now it's only international platform for de-occupation and reintegration Crimea, and more than 60 countries support this platform for the occupation of Crimea. So I would like to focus current situation. Of course, you know about Crimea occupation in 2014, but all the Crimean practices of persecution, deportation of children, forced passportization, mobilization, prohibition of freedom of speech, or destruction of Ukrainian identity are now being used in the newly occupied territory. For example, like Kherson or Zaporizhia region, southern part of Ukraine, but on a new scale and with increased brutality, including the killing of thousands of civilians in these territories. And after February 2022, Russia transformed the Crimea Peninsula not only into one of the key military bases, and unfortunately this base, my home now, is base for attacks on civilian objects and civilians in Ukraine. But also now Crimea it's like entire site of unfreedom. and Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilian hostages from newly occupied territories are being held in Crimea, for example, and Ukrainian children from territories, newly occupied territories, also are forcibly relocated in Crimea, not only to the Russian Federation, also children in Crimea now. In the newly occupied territories, in particular in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, people are abducted by Russian military or Russian Russian Guardi, and of course Russian FSB. Then they are held in places of freedom for some time and subject to torture. And many civilians died after being tortured. Some of them are taken to occupied Crimea, and where they are again tortured by Russian FSB for fabrication political motivated criminal cases. Among them, local journalists, activists, volunteers, city mayors, also women are abducted, and relatives of Ukrainian military are also often victims of these abductions and torture. After being transported to Crimea, for example, volunteers are usually accused, like so-called, of international terrorism, and journalists and activists are accused of espionage. In February and March 2022, the Russian military had so-called blacklist of local civil society representatives, for example, in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. And this list was prepared by the Russian FSB, and including anti-corruption activists, human rights defenders, local lawyers, journalists, representatives of local authorities, and member of Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people. And FSB prepared similar lists in 2014. For example, many of my colleagues from Crimea also were put in this blacklist, and unfortunately some of Crimean activists were abducted in 2014. And now we see the same situation in the newly occupied territories. Persecution also continues in Crimea as well, and Ukrainian citizens are being persecuted in Crimea for their political views, opposition to the occupation and the war, or religion affiliation. And among political prisoners now are journalists, at least 15 journalists are in custody now among Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar journalists, and also among them many Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar activists. And currently, according to the human rights group, Crimean Human Rights Group, at least 173 Ukrainian citizens are political prisoners now and held in colonies in penitential centers in Crimea or in the Russian Federation. And before, for example, before the full-scale invasion, at least 116 Ukrainian citizens are political prisoners, and you see this number, unfortunately, is increasing. And Crimean residents are being persecuted for any demonstration of pro-Ukrainian position, even for singing Ukrainian songs. For example, Червона Калина, Ukrainian anthem, or, Ukrainian song Stefania. Stefania was like a winner of Eurovision last year. And one of the most common grounds for persecuting is its posting on a social network such Crimea is Ukraine, no war, I'm for peace, we stand with Ukraine, or for example post with negative attitude towards the Russian armed forces or desertification with Putin. And the glory to Ukraine slogan is always a reason for persecution in Crimea now. For example, the Crimean judges in the court verdicts state that the glory to Ukraine slogan demonstrates a provocation against the state system and discreditation of using the armed forces of Russian Federation to support international peace and security within framework of the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. So it's like part of real court decision in Crimea. And thousands of civilians remain hostages, and it's for us, like human rights defenders, like Ukrainian citizens, it's extremely necessary to establish an efficient international mechanism to identify civilian hostages, release them, and return to Ukraine-controlled territories. Because the current exchange process, I think you know about some negotiation between Russia and Ukraine about prisoners of war, about Ukrainian military. But unfortunately, this process between Ukraine and Russia are for prisoners of war, while in case of civilians, including political prisoners in Crimea, there are non-effective mechanisms for their release and return, as well for their data verification and monitoring place of freedom. Therefore, we appeal to partner countries to initiate international consultations for establish such mechanism, because it's necessary both for Ukraine and other regions. Unfortunately, terrorist regimes continue to take hostages, as they did in Israel and as they do in Ukraine, and there are no effective mechanisms for their release. So, for Ukrainian human rights defenders, it's one of the main tasks to find this mechanism for release Ukrainian hostages. Thank you.
Thank you, Olha. I will give a space for maybe one quick question, if there is any, or we can continue with other speakers. Okay, I will hand over the word to Tatiana, which has topics directly follows about what Olha spoke about.
Good morning, dear colleagues. We are grateful that you all came here, and very grateful to our Czech colleagues Nesehnutí for arranging this press conference. My organization, Human Rights Center Zmina, works to protect journalists, activists, and human rights defenders in Crimea, and we observe and document the human rights situation in the occupied peninsula from 2014. And now we see the significant deterioration of the situation, especially after the 24th of February 2022. So first, we see that with every new wave of the armed aggression, the scale of atrocities in Ukraine is growing. For example, Olga mentioned about enforced disappearances and abductions. This practice is not new for us. Russia started this immediately after the occupation of Crimea back in 2014, and there were at least 43 cases of enforced disappearances in the first years of the occupation of Crimea, which were documented by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission. And we see that immediately after it, there were already hundreds of cases of enforced disappearances in Donbass, starting from 2014. And maybe you have heard about the famous unofficial prison isolation, where they kept and tortured people. Some were tortured till death. And now we have not hundreds but thousands of cases of enforced disappearances in the course of Russian armed aggression, and part of these cases are connected with Crimea. First of all, I would like to mention that the practice of enforced disappearances came back to Crimea again after the beginning of the large-scale invasion, and due to the local human rights groups. We know at least about 33 cases of enforced disappearances on the territory of Crimea, and more than half of them were registered in spring this year, when Russian law enforcement every week abducted several Crimean Tatar to check them if they are connected with some sabotage on the railway stations, and these people were kept incommunicado without lawyers, so this is enforced disappearances. Also, my colleague, citizen journalist Irina Danilovich, was abducted in April 2022, and she was kept in communicado detention without any information where she is, and that she is kept by the Russian side for 13 days. And one more case is the case of Kirilo Barannik. He's a sportsman. He was abducted in the center of Simferopol in May this year. He was tortured with electricity current for 1 day to push them to confess in committing the sabotage. These were cases registered on the territory of Crimea, but another side of this problem is that the victims of enforced disappearances from the newly occupied territories of Ukraine, mainly from Kherson region, Zaporizhia region, which were abducted in these territories, are sent to Crimea. And it is known about at least 133 cases when Ukrainian citizens from the newly occupied territories were transferred incommunicado to Crimea. And in the vast majority of these cases, Russian side does not confirm that they have these people. And we know that they are there, or from other people who were released from captivity and who saw them in the pretrial detention center in Simferopol, or who heard about them. And usually they are kept in this pretrial detention center number 2 in Simferopol, which was recently opened, and the conditions of detention there are very harsh, and there is a full isolation from the external world and communication. And the practice of torture is applied in many cases against our political prisoners. For example, this practice was applied against Enver Krosh, Irina Danilovich, Pavlo Zaporozhets, Rustem Osmanov, Kirill Barannik, Ruslan Abdurrahmanov, Mikhail Chupil, and Alexei Kiselyov. And for example, one of examples is that people who are kept in this pretrial detention center number 2 in Simferopol, they are forbidden to, for example, sit or lay, but they have to stand, for example, for 16 hours in a row, etc., etc. As Olga mentioned, there are at least 173 Crimean political prisoners who are kept either on the territory of Russia or in the territory of Crimea in the captivity in the detention centers of prisons, and out of them around 50 political prisoners face problems with deprivation of medical aid, and we consider this is a very serious situation, as 2 of political prisoners, Konstantin Shirin and Jamil Hafarov, have already died in captivity with lack of adequate medical treatment. And at the moment, at least 21 political prisoners are in this very high risk zone because of their chronic diseases, or they are elderly people who got long imprisonment, or they are people with disabilities, and we need urgent reaction from the rest of the world to bring attention to these cases, as these people can simply die in captivity. And in these materials that we brought, there is a list of such people who need urgent treatment, and we ask you to share information about these cases, as well as also we call Czech Republic and also other EU countries to impose personal sanctions for those representatives of the Russian Federation and occupational authorities in Crimea who are connected with the deprivation of medical aid. And we also have the lists of persons whom we suggest to impose in the sanction lists, to include in the sanction lists, so they know that all the activities are noticed by the international community and foreign media. Also, as Olga mentioned, I will just give a number to this, that a lot of people are persecuted in Crimea and brought to administrative responsibility for the so-called discreditation of the Russian army. And this is not only anti-war protests or posts. These are also just, as Olga mentioned, for example, listening to Ukrainian songs, or just having a manicure in the color of yellow and black colors of the Ukrainian flag. And usually these people have to pay fines, and the total amount now is at least 13 million Russian rubles, and this is 424 persons from Crimea who were brought for administrative responsibility for the so-called discreditation of the Russian army. And also among all these political prisoners, we have 15 journalists, and we also have lists and stories of these journalists. We asked to share this information. 3 of them were imprisoned after the beginning of the Russian large-scale invasion, and the vast majority of them were already transferred to Crimea. They got their verdicts, and they are now on the territory of the Russian Federation, which is also a violation of the international law, because the occupying power do not have to transfer the population from the occupied territory to its own territory. And also the last trend is increasing pressure to lawyers and human rights defenders in Crimea after the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Many lawyers, local lawyers, received administrative arrests and fines. 3 of them were deprived of their licenses, and they cannot conduct legal practices. These are Lilia Ghemedji, Rustem Kamilev, and Nazim Sheikh-Mambetov. And Russia is continuing to press independent independent lawyers. For example, just recently on 13th of October, Alexei Ladin, Russian lawyer who is protecting political prisoners in Crimea, was arrested for 14 days. And also local human rights defender Abdurashid Japarov was 2 times subjected to administrative responsibility, and last time he received 12 days of administrative arrests. So this situation is also requiring international attention, as we consider journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders to be vital for continuing their work in the occupied Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now I will hand over the word to Darina.
Thank you for giving me a floor, and also thank you for coming and for your interest in Crimea topic as well. My name is Darina Pinhorna. I'm a lawyer from Ukrainian NGO called Regional Center for Human Rights, and mainly we involved into documentation and investigations of genocide crime in the situation of Ukraine is deportation of kids, destruction of national and cultural identity, demographic composition of Crimea Peninsula, also processes of reintegration, and the occupation is always in our scope of professional interest. My personal is about the culture and cultural heritage identity, and what we see in Crimea is a huge mass of crimes against culture heritage, but also against culture rights of people who are living in Crimea. And we understand that in terms of international armed conflict, we always talk about people's life, people's health, and it's always topics as a stake, but also culture is very important to talk right now, because culture is what we are going to build on our reintegration processes and reconciliation processes after the war will end and people will return to the Crimea. And what we see is that Russians are doing their occupation to do checklist very well, because first steps they done in Crimea is they cut all the cultural links with the mainland of Ukraine. They destruct all culture heritages through so-called reconstruction processes, rebuilding processes. They illegally appropriate all Ukrainian culture institutions like museums, libraries, archives. They destruct everything they see in Ukrainian language, or they see just the name Ukraine. For example, their policy of renaming all the buildings, of the theaters, streets, some monuments from Ukrainian to some Russian style, or kind of, for example, the theater of Ukrainian drama in Sevastopol, they renamed just in, Great Russian Drama Theater, and it's that what they did in 2014. Right now we see they also engaged in mass scope of illegal archaeology excavation things. A lot of archaeological expedition are carrying out right now in Crimea. We estimated for around from 20 to 50 expeditions per year per season, archaeological season in Crimea, during which one expedition can dig out from Ukrainian land for about 1 million artifacts, and half of them artifacts are moving right now to Crimean museums or to the Russian Federation. For example, last year on the official website of Institute of Archaeology of Russian Academy of Science, we managed to find information that during 2 months of their activity in Crimea, on one site only, they dig out around 1 million artifacts, 200,000 of which they already moved to the Russian Federation territory for some exhibition and restoration processes. And we definitely know that they will be lost forever, these monuments, because we have no access to the territory. We have no information about which artifacts they dig out, in which state these artifacts are, because they did not provide the follow-up information about their activities in expeditions. They also do some reconstruction works, some restoration works. Famous Bakhchisaray Palace, which is totally under destruction because of their so-called restoration work. We managed to see that they already destruct a lot, like 60-70% of historical monuments, historical stones inside the Bakhchisaray Palace, and managed to remade it with some modern materials, which is not sufficient for such historical landmark. And this is really bad, because when Ukraine will liberate the peninsula and people wanted to return, they will return to some empty places without any history of sign of their nation, of their region. And for Crimean Tatars, whose Bakhchisaray Palace is the only physical monument of their culture, heritage, history, there will be a huge loss, because this will be the loss of their culture, there will be loss of their history, of their nation. And basically people probably will not want to return to the territories where the nothing will represent them, and to rebuild it will be another scope of problem. Right now, all these crimes are definitely war crimes and crimes against humanity according to international criminal law and to international humanitarian law. It's a huge mass atrocities we saw. There is a lot of violations. We can definitely say that it is a violation according to the international legal rules and kind of. And the problem is that we pay less attention to the culture problems, because it's something that will bother us afterwards, that we will see afterwards, because right now we have people's life, people's health, and kind of libraries, hospitals, some destruction, bombing, and this is really important, but also culture is important, because we see that Russians are using all these crimes to support the idea of a Russian peace theory. They always influence on some European countries where they have a strong presence, for example, Serbia or some other Baltic, not Baltic, but Balkan, yes, thank you. Some Balkan regions where they have still a strong presence. We see a lot of Russian scientists, a lot of Russians, cultural people who are moving to the European and other countries, and they still have their activity, they still have some influence, they still have their presence, and we have information that part of those scientists that were involved into digging out Ukrainian cultural properties in the territory of Crimea during the occupation, they are now heads of some archaeological expeditions in European countries that are funded by the European Union or by the Russian Federation money. So it's a problem that sanctions are still not imposed on such sector of their activities. They still not personified the sanctions, because imposing sanction on Hermitage Museum is not enough. We need to impose sanctions on some persons who are responsible for signing the allowance for these people to have their activity in Crimea, to destruct culture, to destruct future of Ukrainian, to destruct future of stability and peace in this region. Because without culture, it is impossible to talk about some reconciliation, some institute of memorialization, some peace allowance and kind of. And right now, my organization, Regional Center for Human Rights, we, in cooperation with National Prosecution Office, but also with National Agency for Fighting Corruption, and we, just a few days ago, we presented to the public the site that we created in their cooperation, where we post some artifacts that we found on Russian websites that we definitely know that they was they were digged out from Ukrainian land in Crimea during the expeditions, and they are now in Crimea or somewhere in Russian Federation. And we call for European community to pay attention to this site, to pay attention to these artifacts that presented on this website, because we have a lot of information of Russians selling Ukrainian gas to eBay or to some like Salisbury auctions and kind of, because we have a lot of information coming from the European partners about this trouble, and we want to fight it very much, and we want to return our culture property back, to save our culture, to save our future, and to save the future of our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. And we will continue with Dr. Gayana Yüksel and her topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you for opportunity to take participant at this press conference. My name is Gayana Yüksel. I am a member of the representative and executive body of indigenous Crimean Tatars, and at the same time I am PhD in mass media, and I work for the Tavrida National University, the biggest university of Crimea. Unfortunately, the both organizations were banned in Crimea, and nowadays we continue our work in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine. Mejlis was recognized as extremist organization. Tavrida National University were relocated and evacuated from Crimea, and all of us, unfortunately, cannot nowadays return to Crimea. My speech will about information sphere. Of course, I cannot separate it from another areas of humanitarian life, as culture, history, science, cultural heritage, etc. But of course it depends on general situation in Ukraine, in Crimea, and I'd like to demonstrate, to show you one document which we prepare, me and my colleagues. This is a recommendation for the informational reintegration of Crimea after the deoccupation. This is a document about future of Crimea after the deoccupation, but before it I'd like to say a few words about general situation in Crimea in information sphere, and continue the topics of my colleagues. The consequences of the occupation in information sphere and humanitarian line are well known. Then they include mythologization and distortion of history, presenting Crimea as an integral part of the Russia, militarization of consciousness, especially among children and youth, and demonization of Ukraine and calls to destroy Ukraine. The results of occupation include the reduction of number of media outlets. A lot of my colleagues, nearly 200, were forced to leave Crimea, and nowadays all of them in Ukraine and different countries all over the world. There are real repression against civil journalists, ordinary people who take phones, gadgets, and start telling about the truth about what was happening in Crimea. And today Russia unlawfully detains 181 political prisoners, and 16 of them are journalists. I'd like to say about them: Irina Danilovich, Osman Arif Memetov, Alexey Bessarabov, Timur Ibragimov, Rimzi Bekirov, Vilen Timiryanov, Marlen Asanov, Nariman Zhelyal, Rustem Sheikhaliev, Server Mustafayev, Vladislav Yesipenko, Ahmed Suleimanov, Asan Akhtemov, Ruslan Suleimanov, Siran Saliyev, and others. But that's not all. Unfortunately, Crimea nowadays has become a small USSR of 1937, where information and denunciation thrive. The so-called Crimean Smash movement, as example, monitor any actions and then subject people to humiliating detentions, beatings, fines, and force them to apologize publicly on a camera. And the main topic of my speech is the situation in Crimea after the deoccupation. We have to be ready for the occupation. It's not early to speak about it, but we must clearly understand what Crimea we will return to after the occupation. Today, the Ukrainian community, authorities, civil society are preparing for the occupation, and consciousness in Ukraine has changed. If until February 24, 2022, we spoke about the possibility of returning Crimea through political and diplomatic means, political and diplomatic ways, now we say that the main participant in the occupation of Crimea is the armed forces of Ukraine. What will the situation be in Crimea after the occupation? What about the information sphere especially? We have to speak openly. We must be prepared for various scenarios, and one of them is the complete destruction of infrastructure, communications, and material and technical base for any institutions to function normally, not just the media, any institution, including the authorities. We saw it in Kherson. Last year, after the occupation, Russian authorities, occupants, destroyed everything. And this moment, Ukraine must be ready to work under these extraordinary conditions. Clear work of military administration, media, and civil society. We don't know how long this period will last, but we need to be mentally, psychologically, and organizationally prepared. We have the example of Kherson, as I said, and continue our work. As for this document, it consists of 4 parts. One of them is proposals or recommendation for post-occupation measures in information policy, short-term stage, long-term stage, and work in the issue of the occupation for international partners and media, publishing sector, books and magazines, and a punishment for crimes in the international sphere during the occupation period. I'd like to read about issues of the occupation for international partners and media. Organization of systematic consultations, exchange of experience with international partners to disseminate objective information about the occupied Crimea. Continue cooperation with the international non-governmental organization dealing with Crimea issues. Involvement of international partners and international organizations to active construction and support to the restoration of the Ukrainian Crimea media system. Cooperation with experts and journalists from leading global media to acquaint the international audience with the real situation in the occupied Crimea. Initiation to visit to the peninsula by special international missions and institutions, facilitating the work and arrival of monitoring missions of various international organizations whose activities are aimed at highlighting the situation in the occupied Crimea. And one proposal is about general global conference. 1 year conference once in year about Crimea. Yes, this is a document. We are ready to give it for you, and of course we are ready for your question. Thank you for your attention.
And now I will hand over the word to the last speaker, Ari Mora.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, my name is Ari Mora. I represent the Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group. We are the Ukrainian-based NGO focusing on justice and accountability in the context of armed conflict. So we represent victims and survivors in domestic and international courts, conduct legal analysis and advocacy based on what are the issues that we identify both in the domestic legal system but also international justice system more broadly, as well as we are involved in the documentation processes and developing documentation infrastructure, as well as provide some training and consultancy towards justice representatives such as investigators and prosecutors, as well as some other stakeholders involved in the administration of justice. So given this kind of a mandate, I would focus on a bit of a broader scope and putting the issues that were identified and highlighted by the previous speakers in a bit of a perspective, in a sense that we have all of those violations, but what do we do with them, right? So where do we put this in motion, and how do we bring the perpetrators to the account as well as protect the victims? And this is important particularly because ensuring justice, while it might seem kind of self-evident, but this is actually one of the key aspects of achieving sustainable peace and in general moving forward both throughout the conflict but also post-conflict. And therefore there are some key issues that we have been able to identify. Some of them are since 2K14, some of them since 24th of February, which is already more than half a year, which are critical to be considered and taken into account in order for justice to be more effective, in order for the investigations to be effective, in order for the process and judicial process as well. And so here are a couple of those that would be basically instrumental to making any of the violations and grave crimes mentioned by my colleagues be possible to be prosecuted for and the perpetrators brought to account. First, it is important to consider that a lot of those violations, and particularly when it comes to Crimea, have been taking place since 2014. They have not started in 24th of February, and this is something that many people right now not necessarily forget, but kind of switch their attention to for understandable reasons, because the full-scale invasion caused a significant rise in the violations, in its scale, in its numbers, which kind of is understanding this shift of attention, but it does not, it shouldn't deteriorate in the sense that we should still focus on all other violations, because grave crimes are similarly grave for the victims who experience those violations and who incur this harm, which means that when we look for any solution to bring perpetrators to account, or when we establish any initiatives, we need to consider those violations as well. A couple of examples. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, right now, although it has the mandate since 2014, so it can look into the situation since the 2014, right now is mostly focusing on the cases related towards post-24th of February, even when it comes to deportation of children, and deportation of children and unlawful displacement has been happening before the full-scale invasion. This is not the way to move forward, and we can see this focus based on even the public statements that they are making on the site of, on the website of the International Criminal Court. Then the compensation mechanism that the Council of Europe has established and that will be operating to basically provide compensations for victims or for those who experience harm from the war. This also will strictly concentrate on post-24th of February, which kind of misses the point of a comprehensive and holistic justice. And therefore, I'm not sure if there is a way to broaden its scope for the compensation mechanism, but then it means that we need to have other mechanisms and initiatives to cater for other people as well, especially given that a lot of those people have been living under occupation for 9 years, who have been experiencing this trauma for a lot of years. The same goes to some other mechanisms that we can see, and this is important for countries who are, as Czech Republic, are so invested, and we are immensely grateful for it, into helping, into assisting for justice to actually take place. It is important for us to be cognizant and aware of this focus. The same goes with regards to the efforts that we should put for the comprehensive justice, such as, for example, the way the system works and which role does the ICC, the International Court, plays. We all put a lot of hope on it, but we all understand its limitations. even within its limitations, it's important for its work to be as effective as possible. And Ukraine, as a state who has still not ratified the Rome Statute, however, is basically the main beneficiary of the work of the court, we kind of feel like this doesn't work. We believe as a civil society that Ukraine, given how much attention it's been getting, especially after the full-scale invasion, should be the proactive stakeholder in ensuring justice and should be strengthening the International Criminal Court rather than showing that you can get some attention and some resource put towards you, but not reciprocate, not strengthen the court by your own actions, such as by ratifying the Rome Statute, especially given that Ukraine has some severe issues related to the domestic justice system, which we need to address, and Rome Statute could have done it. Lastly, I would just say that I know that most of you probably don't pay full attention to all the nitty-gritty of the justice processes which are related to Ukraine, which is completely fair. I would also like not to, but this is my job. So the question is, we all probably heard of Tribunal for Aggression, right? This big thing that Czech Republic is supporting because we all want this accountability, we want the top leadership to be brought to account. However, what is important is when we look for solutions to ensure justice for grave crimes, we need to look for comprehensive and holistic solutions, which means that they would cover as many of violations as possible, right? And Tribunal for Aggression, although is important to ensure justice for the crime of aggression, focuses as of right now only on the crime of aggression. And if this is the thing to be established, then we need to make sure that all other institutions, Ukrainian domestic justice system, cases under universal jurisdiction, which, by the way, Czech Republic also have opened the investigation, and ICC and some other places cover other violations, all of which have been presented by my colleagues. Otherwise, we are leaving a very big gap of crimes that are not being prosecuted effectively. So either we need to reconsider the way we move forward with any special mechanisms that we will be discussing, or we need to ensure that the system beyond the tribunal would be effective enough to prosecute all of those crimes. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much. I'm sorry if I took too much time.
Yeah.
Hopefully not much, but thank you.
I think we are perfectly on time. Thank you very much. Thanks all of you. And now, as you have heard the contributions of our speakers, now it's time for your questions, if there are any. So feel free to ask. And if there will be no more questions, we will move to the individual interviews and questions from face-to-face. So, okay.
Hello, my name is Nezávislé from Czech television. I would like to ask Ms. Kripnik. You talked about approximately 173 political prisoners, and this number is only for Crimea right now, or for which period?
Okay, it's a number of Crimean political prisoners since 2014. It's only Crimea criminal cases, so it's only about Crimeans, Ukrainians, and Crimean Tatars who were deprived of liberty in Crimea under criminal cases like terrorism, so-called terrorism, or espionage, or another criminal cases. But all of these cases, we have proved that all of these cases are fabricated. And many of these Ukrainian citizens are in the Russian Federation, first of all in Russian colonies, because, for example, if this case about so-called terrorism, according to the Russian legislation, only Russian military court can consider decision in this case. So, for example, most of all Crimean Tatars who are accused in terrorism moved to the Russian Federation, to court hearing, and after that transferred to Russian colonies. So this number doesn't include people who were abducted in the newly occupied territories like Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. For example, in December last year, Crimean human rights group documented at least 120 civilians from newly occupied territories in season number 2. It's not about Crimean political prisoners, so 173 plus 120 abducted people from newly occupied territories. And very important that this number of political prisoners and people who were abducted in the newly occupied territories continue to increase, because last year new detention center number 2 was opened in Simferopol, and this year one more detention center, illegal detention center number 8, also was opened in Simferopol. So now we have 3 detention centers in Simferopol.
So they are all kept basically in some detention centers.
Yeah, so situation is that
Either
before,
in Russia or in Ukraine.
these detention centers most for political prisoners, and 2 new detention centers, number 2 and number 8. Здебільшого, як
In most cases.
in most cases, it's for people who were abducted in the newly occupied territories. So, and we see that this number is increased because Russia opens new illegal detention center in Crimea. It's not about the Russian Federation only in Crimea. Before full-scale invasion, we have only 1 detention center in Simferopol, number 1. Now we have at least 3 detention centers, and also we have several illegal places for prisoners of war. For Ukrainian military, most of them in Sevastopol for prisoners of war. Part of these prisoners of war, yes, were released under this process between Ukraine and Russia. But now, unfortunately, this process was stopped by Russian side. So we have no mechanism for civilians, and now, unfortunately, this process for prisoners of war also was stopped.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I see one more.
Just a second, I will give you a microphone.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tomáš Lenhardt. I'm from the newspaper Deníken, and I have a question to Mr. Mora, possible, but maybe to all of you. I would like to know, because this summit is taking place in Czech Republic, what could be the role of the Czech Republic? What is the expectation, and not just of the political representation, but also, I don't know, ordinary people? What do you expect? How could Czech people get involved? How could Czech Republic help in this process of reunification of Crimea? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sure my colleagues can add, given that they have more experience, particularly when we're talking about the Crimean platform. But I feel like of course, most of these talks and processes happen on some kind of official level, right? So either in between the investigative offices or prosecutors' offices, or on some kind of political/diplomatic level. But I feel like in the happily and fortunately living in democracies, we are able to kind of push for specific agenda and specific focuses or actions to be raised on these levels. And first and foremost, what is important is, I guess, one, we did have a significant flow of people into Czech Republic after the full-scale invasion. Some of them have been questioned or interviewed by the Czech National Police, who then opened the national domestic investigation into war crimes that were or allegedly were committed in Ukraine. And it's been like quite some time since this investigation has been opened, and it would be it's important because this is the domestic resource of your country, right? So this is domestic prosecutors and investigators doing this work. So I guess a bit of a discussion in terms of where this investigation is going, what is the prospect of this investigation, and how are those victims are being or witnesses are being treated, is one thing that could definitely be discussed even within the country. The second thing that I would probably say is Czech Republic is quite actively involved in all of the processes related to the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression, so I assume it's a member of the core group. It's also active in other accountability mechanisms with the ICC and stuff like that. And so I would probably say the good thing here is to discuss, as I've been referring in my intervention, how far the government, the president, are advocating for the best solution possible. Why do you support this particular decision or another? How do you see the accountability and what should it include? Because the main thing here is that while those are political decisions to some extent, and eventually though they are political, they should be substance-based, right? They should be justified in a way. And for that, we need to understand why, for example, specifically we are supporting as a country this particular decision. So I would say that the people of Czech Republic, it would be amazing if this conversation would be more active and more thorough, because eventually we are all interested in this, in all of the resources and support that your people and the country is giving to Ukraine to be utilized in the most efficient way. And therefore, it is important to double check how far it's actually being used in the most efficient way in Ukraine or internationally.
Yes, maybe I can add several things. My colleague Arye already mentioned the waves of engagement of Czech Republic in terms of creation of the tribunal on the crime of aggression, the universal jurisdiction, and the investigation in Czech Republic of what happened in Ukraine. But also there are several more other spheres that we would like also to raise during our discussions, especially tomorrow during the parliamentary summit of the Crimean platform. These are also things which were already mentioned by Arye. In general, it's a problem that Crimea and the previous 8 years of the occupation of Crimea before the large-scale invasion are not taken into consideration when we speak about the international justice. When the International Criminal Court is investigating the situation in Ukraine, it is concentrating largely on the cases that happened after 24th of February. While we think as Ukrainian civil society, it is very important that there are some cases which will be investigated by the prosecutor's office of the International Criminal Court after 2014, because it's not like year and a half of the war. It's already 9 years and a half of this Russian aggression, and we think that this is quite important element together with the compensation mechanisms that now are established only for the victims after 24th of February. But what can be proposed for people who were suffering from the results of the Russian armed aggression, who are victims of it after 2014? They are not taken into consideration on the level of the Council of Europe, and during this creation of the compensation mechanism, while we are here to say that these people also have to be included. Next, which is also important for us to raise, especially as Ukrainian civil society, is that Ukraine hasn't ratified Rome Statute, and it is for Parliament to ratify it. And it is very important, if some of you meet tomorrow our speaker, Ruslan Stefanchuk, please ask him why Ukraine didn't ratify Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. We are here to advocate that Ukraine is full member of the ICC, and this is our domestic work in Ukraine, which was not done. And we hope that it will happen soon, but we need also pressure from international international society. One more thing is sanctions. We know that Czech Republic has like domestic sanction legislation, quite new, and that only a few persons were put on the sanction lists in Czech Republic with regard to the Russian armed aggression in Ukraine. So we are here to advocate that more people are sanctioned. We are here to propose concrete suggestions on whom to include in the sanction list in Czech Republic, and also the Czech Republic can propose these people to be included in the EU sanction list. And the very last thing on how the ordinary people in Czech Republic can help, it is very important because now we were speaking a lot about numbers, and I am afraid that the individual stories are missing here. So we ask you to share as much as possible individual stories, how people suffer from all these oppressions and persecutions, and we believe that this, bringing attention to these cases will help, especially if we speak about people who who have bad health conditions and who urgently need medical aid. And we believe if there are sufficient attention to these cases, and if they are published in the international media, in foreign media, it will help, if not to liberate them, but at least to make the situation better, and it will push the administration of penitentiary institutions to provide them needed medical treatment, especially given the fact that many of these prisoners were replaced from the occupied Crimea now to Russian penal colonies, and for their relatives it is much more difficult to provide, to send them, medicals when they are not in Crimea, but when they are transferred to Russia. So we think is just, spreading in the social networks, in media, all these stories is very important for these people and for their relatives.
Thank you very much. We got space for maybe one last question.
Hello, my name is Daria Stomatova. I'm from Czech television. You've already talked about children's abduction, but there's another quite important topic. It's children's militarization in Crimea and in Russia. Would you tell your thoughts about that? Is it also a topic that you take care about?
Yeah, so, okay, maybe a few words from me and my colleague Darina continue. So, it's huge problem, and we have been working with militarization of children and civilian population in Crimea since 2015. So today Russia organized at least 17 draft campaigns. So it's about illegal conscription of Ukrainians in occupied Crimea to Russian armed forces. These actions are international crime according to Rome statute. So, and Ukraine, together with Ukraine Prosecutor Office, together with human rights defenders like my organization of Darina and Tatiana, we collected many evidence of this crime and submitted communication to International Criminal Court about illegal conscription. And after that, we sent one more submission to ICC about also international crimes, war crime, propaganda of military service among children in Crimea. So Russia established a huge system, like so-called educational system, but in real it's not about educational rights. It's only about prepare children for serving in Russian army. So if to be briefly, like Russia established like mobilization resource from Crimean children. So now many children, people who were children when occupation started, now 18 years, and they will sent to military hostilities in Ukraine during this war. So it's a real big issue, and now Ukrainian like, for example, Ukrainian government and human rights defenders are working with strategy what we can do for children after the occupation, how we can work with these consequences of militarization of children. So, but now we see one more issue. It's like not only about propaganda, it's memorialization. Yeah, maybe Darina can tell about more about when when Russian soldiers, it's like heroes in Crimea, and many children, Crimean children now see only this reality, and for example, don't have access to Ukrainian websites or some international websites, only Russian propaganda. So
mostly Russians are involved in this militarization of education of children since 2014 in Crimea, and it's happening on several levels. Like we have formal education, which happening in the school from textbooks, your teacher telling you some history lessons or like math or chemistry kind of. And we have the analytical report on our website that when we discovered what actually is written in these textbooks, that children are provided from the 1st grade till 11th grade. And it's like typical like textbooks like international culture, is geography, is people and me and society, kind of some like principles of safe life, subjects and kind. So it's super typical for every single education system in every country. And we found that mostly these texts are looking very good from the first side, but basically when you start to read and to focus on what is happening around all the textbooks, you are happening into 3 narratives that Russians are providing for the kids from the very young age. I'm not talking even about the kindergarten system education. It's 3 narratives like Russia is your motherland, you need to cherish it, you need to support it in every single way possible. Second one, the very single possible way, it's good, but the best one is to die for your motherland, is to lay your life for your motherland in every single way possible, like on the battlefield is most honored, is most cherished way to protect, to support your motherland. And another one, the best thing when you can lay your life for your motherland is to join Russian army or any other militaristic organizations inside the Russian Federation, under the Russian Federation scope, is to join them and to be part of some glory, militaristic way of supporting your country and defending your country with some weapons and kind of. And the most interesting things that we found in geographical books, textbooks, is that NATO is the enemy, and when any country, doesn't matter, American continent, African continent, European continent, when the Russian people are being discriminated, Russia has the right to defend their rights with a weapon in every aggressive way possible. And children are taught this narrative from the very young age. And this is not like something new for the Russian, because they already taught that for the Russian kids, but also they influenced this in the Crimea from 2014. And children who are taught these lessons from 2014, they already joined Russian armies, they're already on the battlefield in Ukraine, on some front lines, they already are causing some mass atrocities on the battlefield towards their Ukrainian co-citizens. And another level scope, we have informal education, when we have those talks about important every single week in the schools, where teachers are talking to children about historical lessons of the great Russia, about the great culture Russians have, about their mission in the world. They need to protect the world of Russian peace and kind of, and children are taught with it. And we also have the desks with portraits of those who laid their life for the motherland of Russia in the battlefield during the full-scale invasion. And children are sitting on the desks where they have the portraits of these people, looking at them during whole education processes with all their honor things they done in Ukraine, with killings, with bomb shelling and kind of, and they looking into it, and psychologically they're already attracted to them because they're talking about these people, these portraits as the heroes to the Russian kids, to the Ukrainian kids in Crimea. And it's happening every single day during every single school year in the education. And also we have informal things like militaristic camps, militaristic education, militaristic movements. For example, the movement on the first Движение Первых, or some militaristic camps, forgot the name. Юнармия, yeah. Росгвардия. It's all of them are proposing kids to join them, to taught how to to help the weapon, how to fight with the weapon, how to manage some militaristic things, how to clean the tank, or how to make some marches and kind of. So kids are involved from the single young age, like frozen birth, I guess, into this militaristic and activities Russian provides them. And there is no escape, because if you do not want to join it, you will be abused, you will be discriminated, you will be very single persecuted by the Russian people around you, not like FSB, but the Russian society around you, which is already monitored by FSB. And as the lawyers, we see these crimes as a war crime, as a crime against humanity, mostly like a discrimination case against Ukrainian children, because according to international humanitarian law, occupying powers should propose kids education, but education in their native language, with their native some attractions, culture, kind of, but Russians do not do it, obviously, because Russians are not very common grade, on the common level with international law and system. And we see this discrimination case against Ukrainian children in Crimea territory, but also in the territory of Russian Federation, where they already deported.
I'd like to add some words
Yeah.
very briefly. My last book was about transformation of media sphere in Crimea after the occupation, 2014, February 2014, until full-scale aggression, February 2022. And the part of my book, Consequences of Occupation, was about ideological consequences. And this is this problem, militarization of population of Crimea, and especially children and youth, will be very big issue of the occupation, because 10 years is not short term. To be briefly, Russian authorities, they prepare our children for death. They said, you grow up, you fight and die for your homeland, for Russia. If to be briefly, it's a very hard problem, and as I said, we have to be ready for this, and because this is our children, this is our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all speakers. Thank you all for coming. And now there is still time for individual interviews. Some of them are already pre-arranged, and there is still space for it. So thank you very much, and consider this the official end of the press conference.